So welcome to our January Playbook event. My name is Scott Phillips. I'm the president and founder of Starfish Medical. We've been hosting these events for, ever since the beginning of COVID now, and they've taken a bit of a life of themselves. So this time we're pleased to present the topic of turning life experience into successful medical device startups. We have a couple of very interesting, distinguished medical device entrepreneurs. Just to set a bit of context for you, if you're interested in looking at some previous ones, if you go to the Starfish Medical website, starfishmedical.com, and the About Us webinars, you'll find previous recordings that you can watch. Should be really interesting. Also, next month we'll be having, our topic will be keys to successful university spinouts, which should also be really interesting. As I get going, let me give you a tiny bit of context about I've already talked about that and about that. A little bit about Starfish, just so for your context. We serve North America with about now more like 150 staff members and a couple of main offices, and also we're present in Boston and Southern California. We work for companies, a mix of corporate and startup type companies with complex electromechanical kind of products that we care a lot. What we actually care the most about is having successful clients. What can we do to enable the right product for the right market that's well executed, and so the founders do well. Enough about Starfish. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker. If I was to properly introduce Paul Lavoy, it would take about half an hour, because he's been working on startup companies as a technical innovator for 43 years. He created a company called Zoft, which is micro-miniature X-ray tubes. One of the companies he'll talk about today is Jan Medical, which is a imaging modality to find cerebral anomalies very, very quickly. And I know he'll talk about that, so I won't spoil any of his thunder. Most recently, he's been working on mind rhythm with UCSF, which is finding large vessel strokes in a pre-hospital. And the reason he got into medical is also very interesting. So another thing, I think, as a badge of honor, his companies have raised over $900 million of capital. Just give you a sense of the scale of what Paul has achieved. So I'm super excited to introduce Paul, and I'll pass the floor to you. If you could just unmute.
Thank you very much, Scott, for that kind introduction, and thank you for Starfish to provide this forum. I would say to a normal lecture, good morning, but given that this is a new time and a new world, it's probably good day. You can be anywhere. When I first talked to Scott about this, it was about mind rhythm, but when he realized I had some other companies, he said, well, what got you there? What was the background to that? And so I had never actually mapped that out, and this was actually a good experience that might help with a memoir someday. Lots of things got learned doing all these companies. Some one-liners. That one seems pretty straightforward. Do everything right from the start, but you'd be surprised how many people cut corners when they start a company, and don't do that. Just go ahead and go with it. And you can't do this in Kansas. What do I mean by that? If you got a rich uncle that'll fund you, great. But if you're going to start a startup, a whiteboard, a room with nothing on the walls and some colored markers, and that's what you're going to start, you need people to come help you. And those people are in the West Coast, in Boston area, and in Silicon Valley. You can find those people. They're hard to find anywhere else. Make sure you own the IP. That was a hard lesson. While there's going to be 8 companies I'm going to talk about that I started, there were 4 more that didn't get funded, and 2 of those were really important companies that didn't get funded because somebody got in the way and they didn't own the intellectual property. Never have a startup depend on a startup. You get 1 chance in 10 at making it through the first year. Combine 2 of those, you get 1 chance in 100. There's a lesson there. The wrong money can change your path, can kill you. Don't take it. It's better not to take it than to have the wrong money. Don't celebrate raising money. Everyone gets so excited raising money. That was the easy part. Then you have to actually use it. Wow, you started your own company or you own your own company. Be careful what you wish for. The highs are high, but the lows are low. The most important thing, can you tell a story? Can you tell a story that is sufficiently compelling that you can get people to come work for free for a year or 2 years to develop the ideas, to expand the marketing, to understand every key piece you need and move forward before you have money? And the answer is you can. So in grad school, I came out to California, back to California. I'm from California, and I met Len Reed at a church. I came back to see the director who had married me, and he hired me on the spot, basically, without an interview, which would prove to be sort of foreshadowing of things to come. So when I got out, he worked at a company called ILC, which did flash lamps and glass metal ceiling and large laser pumps, and with my help afterwards, space lighting. ILC did the space shuttle lights, inside lights, outside lights. We put lights on the Viking lander on Mars, the Skylab space station now. All those are ILC lights. That was kind of an interesting world. But we left to start my first company, Len and I did, at a company called INTA. And he wanted to go into space stuff. So we did getaway specials like CubeSat today. You know, little cheap things you could put in space. We owned more options than anyone. The trouble is we couldn't find a market for it. It was like 40 years too early. So we were hurting. The company was, we had no idea what we were doing. And the company was hurting badly. And we got an opportunity to do the strobes for war games. That was screens at the end in the Crystal Palace where the screens went crazy and the computer was playing against things. We did all that. $100,000, made enough money to keep the company going. Do you want to play a game? So we went back to doing what Len didn't want to do. Government contract engineering, ceramic to metal ceiling course, commercial contracting. That's what he knew how to do from his ILC days. So we did that. And we got some nice government contracts. We had one to do flash lamp paint stripping from aircraft. And we worked on the Tomcat, the F-14 TF-30 engine, doing laser welding and cutting to repair the engines. And then as things happened, the Berlin Wall fell in 89, and government contracting essentially dried up overnight. So we still had, after that, this ceiling course that Len did. He taught it in Amsterdam, New Jersey, and on San Mateo, California. Once, 3 times a year, one of each of those places. People came because this was a complicated technology and they needed to learn about it. And it was a week-long course. But you know, when people come to do that, they find out that it's hard to do this. And so we had stuff. The little XRT Corporation was a miniature X-ray tube. Source Tech was a flat panel display. DuPont wanted to help with some low-fired, co-fired ceramic, submarine towed arrays. Those all were people who came to the course, but they didn't really know how to do what they needed to do. So they gave us contracts. And so we had contracting with each of them. Well, the little X-ray tube company and the flat panel display company didn't like what we told them. We told them it was hard and it was going to take some work. And they wanted a fast answer, but they didn't get it. I told you we did the rework engine for the F-14. Well, we bought a big robot from Unimation, and Unimation was bought by Westinghouse, and they trashed it. So the head, Klaus Nielsen, left and went to UPS, and is headed up R&D there. And he gave us some contracts to work on some little RFID stuff. Then those two businesses went out of business. XRT and Source went belly up. And wow, Source Tech was using photoceram to try and get traces, XY traces, out of a of a ceramic, thousands of them, because you had to have a trace for each row and each column, but didn't work. But the DuPont work we had done told us that we could put traces between layers of ceramic and fire them. Were they hermetic? Nobody knew. DuPont didn't know, but it was. And that formed Condescent. Probably the best flat panel display ever built. It was beautiful. 2.5 millimeters thick, CRT. You could watch it on the beach in sunlight. Try that with your active matrix LCD right now. So what happened? A little bit of greed, some really bad luck. They reincorporated in Puerto Rico. Perfection got in the way of okay because they wanted 10,000 hour life. You use as a 5-year display, you know, back then. They lasted 2 years, it would have been great, but they wanted to work on that. Another year went by. They did a convertible debenture for the G round. Who's ever heard of a G round? Well, it's what happens when you raise $700 million. They filed for an IPO in February of 2000, and if you know your history, that was the beginning of the internet bubble burst. 450 people, production line, all toast. Really, really sad. Third company was paint stripping. I had gone to North Island to talk to them, the Naval Air Rework there, and they'd said flash lamps aren't going to cut it. You got to come up with something clever. So we came up with the idea of taking a laser, a pulsed laser, and cleaning a little section off, and you could mill off about 1/3 of a mil of paint per pulse. So with 1,000 pulses per second, you could mill a square foot in a minute. And you could do it with spectroscopy, so you actually stop at the primer if you wanted. So we could strip paint off a plane and leave the primer, or strip off the paint from a helicopter rotor blade and leave the gel coat for the composites. We sold one system to the Navy at Corpus Christi, but the world didn't have a laser that was big enough and robust enough to do the job, and it was really unfortunate. So that's one that didn't make it. That Zoft microtube, that little X-ray tube, this is one of the few companies where I didn't invent the technology. I just knew how to build it. And they said, no, we can't build it that way. And I said, yes, we can. So I went back to the engineers who were no longer working there because the company was out of business. And I said, I can build those little X-ray tubes. And they said, prove it. And then maybe we'll do something with you. So the 6Q tube at the top is a 6 millimeter X-ray tube I built in my garage. We built 10 of them. 4 of them worked. We went on the road. We got, I think we raised 14 million on that round. The 3Q, by the way, Q was for quick. It was supposed to be a quick. So the 3Q was a 3 millimeter tube. The 2.25 millimeter tube is the one you can see there. That's in production today. And the 1 millimeter tube was built and didn't get used, but it was for coronary restenosis. Got knocked out of that market. Ended up doing breast cancer therapy and endometrial and skin, and so that company got sold to iCAD, still out there doing it. We got the IR 100 award and editor's choice for that product. So when Klaus Nielsen gave me the little railroad tag, the RFID railroad tag, he said, take a look at this. Maybe this will help with our data that we want to keep. And I hadn't done anything with it, but I was flying back to Atlanta. They were in north of Atlanta in Dunwoody, and I was flying back there, and I hadn't done anything, so I brought a big screwdriver with me. Imagine trying to get that on an airplane today. And I cranked that thing open, big, huge thing. It was like 8 inches long and 4 inches wide, and really industrial strength plastic, because it had to survive bolted to the side of a railroad car. And I opened it up, and all that was inside was a printed circuit board with an antenna and a teeny little chip. And the chip, I knew the die inside was even smaller, and there was like 7 or 8 discretes around it. And I said, wow, the reason the antenna is so big is because they've got to be a long ways away. And you got 1/r² out, 1/r² back, and you're going to lose a lot of signal. But what if I was going to be closer and I could absorb the energy from the transmitter onto the chip, and I could then retransmit the signal? I won't have the 1/r² problem, or 1/r⁴ problem. And so I formed a company called Tagit. There's the startup crew in Whole Foods cafeteria. And can you tell a story? This was a story about how to make a little teeny RFID tag different than any tag that's ever been made before. And there's a picture of the die. The antennas are the two little brown stripes around the outside. The yellow-green area is the capacitor, where all the power was stored. This ran at 5.8 gigahertz. The little charge pumps, the little coils in the middle. And it charged it up. When it got to charge, it took all the data in that memory on the right, and it broadcast it back ultra-wideband. And it worked really well. We were going to track blood tubes in the in vitro diagnostic lab. Blood tubes, there's about between 6 and 8 billion used in the US a year, and they're all destroyed. Cute market for a 5-cent product. Can you believe it? A second financial crash, and we got killed. C round, couldn't raise any more money. That was the end of that one. It was very unfortunate. And then in 2003, my wife died of a subarachnoid hemorrhagic stroke. She had 3 aneurysms in her brain. One of them broke. You have an aneurysm breaks, extra blood in your brain, raises the intracranial pressure, and it kills you. So she died. I went about and formed Jan Medical. The idea behind forming Jan Medical was that, gee, it's only a couple of inches into the middle of the brain from the outside. There's got to be something better than preparing somebody to go from being in a induced coma and being put on portable equipment and taken into the cath lab to see what's going on. There's got to be something better. So I started working on some acoustics. It didn't work, but I got a hold of some submarine warfare people, sonar, and they said, don't use acoustics, use accelerometers. And we got some signals, and it looked really good. There's that team of, can you tell a story? So the two folks on the right, Casey McGlynn and Elton, those are the lawyers. Everybody else there came on board, liked the story, worked for a year putting this together. I'm sorry, about 6 months, this one. And that's important to the next step, because at this meeting, somebody said, well, how long did it take you to form this company? And I said, gee, I can calculate that. It's only been 143 days. I was at dinner that night with my oldest son, Skylar, and I forget who the friend was, but somebody there, and he said, wow, you got that company started quickly. And I said, yeah, it just happened, it came up in the meeting today that it was 143 days. And my son exclaimed, his head shot up, and he said, Dad, do you know what 143 is in pager code? And I said, I have no idea what 143 is in pager code. I don't know what any pager code is. And he said, 143 in pager code is 1 for I, and 4 for love, and 3 for you. So if I ever write a book about this, the working title is 143. In the background, that little X-ray tube puts out X-rays, photons. It's a great little radiation source for cancer, but it would be better if it was electrons. But you need like 8 million electron volts to do electron source. And so nobody's ever made an electron brachytherapy source, because it's just not possible to get 8 MeV electrons out of a source that's 2 millimeters in diameter and 5 millimeters long. Well, it turns out there is one way, laser plasma acceleration. If you take an 8 femtosecond pulse and you drive it up a fiber optic into a plasma, you'll generate 8 MeV electrons in 200 microns of acceleration path length. 6,000 times the gradient of any accelerator on the planet today. We've finished the first phase of an SBIR. We have a second one in. We have a couple patents in the area and a team working on that. About that money, getting the wrong money in. So BrainLab put money into Jan Medical and then put people in. And I ended up with over half the people in this picture are from BrainLab, and they reported to 3 different executives. It was a nightmare. So I left. They bought the whole thing. They were working on concussion, and they still haven't launched a product. I went to UCSF with our medical director, Wade Smith, and we worked for 2 years developing the next company. They got purchased, and we did Mind Rhythm. Mind Rhythm was a large vessel occlusion stroke triage company. There's the headset. So we licensed the technology that we had developed at UCSF back out. Non-invasive, disposable, large vessel occlusion stroke triage tool. What does our signal look like from this? Can you believe that there's a little pulse on the side of your head, and the top of your head, and the front of your head that looks like the upper left corner? That's 60 heartbeats superimposed on top of each other. Each one of those is 1 heartbeat long. That's the brain oscillating. Each person is a little different, pretty similar, but a little different, but very stable. That's the same as it was a decade ago or yesterday. But on the right, you see a large vessel occlusion stroke where all of that synchronicity has gone away. That is the signature for a large vessel occlusion stroke. 1 hour after the clot was removed is the middle one, and the next day is the lower one. Small vessel strokes, the one in the middle left, and the mimics on the lower left don't look like large vessel occlusion strokes. We've run several clinical trials, published peer-reviewed papers. This is one of the primary ones. So why is this important? Well, there's only 200 comprehensive stroke centers in the US. There's 1,200 primary stroke centers. Primary stroke centers can't take the clots out. There are 6,000 hospitals. So which one is likely the closest if you have a stroke? Well, it's probably not the right one. If it's a long distance to go to a comprehensive stroke center and you take a patient that doesn't need to be there, then you've taken too much time. If, on the other hand, you take a large vessel occlusion stroke patient to a primary stroke center or a regular hospital, the transfer time averages around 2 hours. The difference is if you get in the first hour, the magic golden hour, and you get that clot removed, you can basically walk out the next day. If, on the other hand, you get that 2-hour delay, stroke is the 5th leading cause of death in the US, but it's the leading cause of permanent disability. So getting the right patient to the right place is really critical, which is what our little disposable device will do in about 90 seconds. Where are we? Well, we're starting up our next big clinical trial at Wayne State University. IRB approvals in, the contract signed. We're starting training of the EMS crews. We have the hardware built. It'll be a 250 patient study generating 50 large vessel occlusion patients. We expect the pre-sub to go in the next couple of months to the FDA to get regulatory pathway agreement and to decide on the pivotal trial, which will come next. And that will be at 4 hospitals, 6 to 8 months trial. Obviously, we don't know yet how many patients. It'll depend on this part 1 trial. And of course, with a little plug to our sponsors, product development and design control at Starfish Medical. We've closed our initial Series Seed round, first tranche. Of course, you can always look for more money. So anyone out in the audience would like some perspectives, we'd be glad to help you out on that. And with that, Scott, thank you very much for the opportunity to present today.
I have about 1,000 questions for you. In fact, I wish we had scheduled all day long for this seminar, but we'll do that another time. For the audience, I am really looking forward to the discussion in the Q&A section. You'll notice on your screen there's a Q&A tab. And so if you have any interesting questions for Paul or for Derek, then just go ahead and click on that tab and you can put questions in. And when Derek has done his talk, then I'll MC the Q&A section. Alrighty, I see that our audience numbers are stable and everybody's sticking around, and you'll be glad you did, because our next speaker is really interesting and inspiring. in a different way. He does not have 43 years of experience in medical device startups. He's in an earlier stage of his career, but he's done some remarkable things in his time. And he actually started in as a Marine officer, as a Marine infantry special operations officer. You can imagine all the things that he's seen and the challenges that he's faced in doing that. He was deployed to Afghanistan in 2012. He was shot in an enemy firefight and was paralyzed from the chest down. Just imagine yourself in his shoes. And however, he repatriated back to the U.S. and got some training, and he actually decided to turn that situation to a positive. And he founded a company called Spinal Singularity, which was founded in 2015. And after he graduated from the UCLA Anderson EMBA program, he'll tell us about that company. And through that, he's had a number of other interesting opportunities. So I won't steal any of his thunder. I'm just excited to hear what Derek has to tell us. Over to you, Derek.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the opportunity and for hosting us, Scott. This is a phenomenal opportunity for us to share and hopefully inspire anybody else to learn more about entrepreneurship or continue on as entrepreneurs in the companies that you're working with. So thank you for having us. As Scott mentioned, my name is Derek Herrera. I am currently the founder and CTO of a company called Spinal Singularity, which I started in 2015 with the mission of developing medical devices to help improve the quality of life for people just like me with spinal cord injury. And since then, I've had a lot of other opportunities and continue to expand and try to grow the impact that I've been able to have and make it my life's mission to improve life through innovation, utilizing my skill set, which I have, which is unique, which is having an injury and understanding firsthand user needs and those sorts of things. And then working with teams and resourcing teams to solve those issues in unique and novel ways that are sustainable businesses and bringing products to market. So as Scott mentioned, I don't have the experience that Paul does, so I'll be focusing a little bit more on other tips and tricks that I've learned and concepts that have been foundational for me as I've become an entrepreneur and pursued this line of work. And so up front, they focus really around three things, concepts like operational risk management, taking calculated risks, assessing situations, and understanding when and how to leap into new situations and solve problems in a calculated and analytical way. And then two, psychological frameworks, things including Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which helped me personally to understand the theory of human motivation and behavior, as well as to categorize events that I lived through as I was moving forward to rebuild my life. And then lastly, Stoic mindset, coupled with a very important distinction of understanding situational and self-awareness through constant experimentation to understand what you as a person and individual are capable of and what your environment truly is and what's within your control and what's not. So I started with risk management at a very young age. This photo is one of my first memories. I was about 4 years old. My grandfather came up with 2 bikes. He said, "Hey, Derek, you can have this one with training wheels, or you can take this fancy purple one without training wheels." And being the aggressive young man that I was at that time, decided to go without training wheels, immediately crashed, hurt myself, but figured it out. And so that was the first memory I had in a long line of calculated risk taking and decision making in aggressive environments. So I ended up at the Naval Academy, where I studied engineering and chose to pursue a line of work that I was called to do, which was to become a Marine infantry and special operations officer thereafter. And so I graduated in 2006 from the Naval Academy and was commissioned as a Marine lieutenant. I went through infantry training and then deployed twice as an infantry officer. The first deployment was to Iraq in 2008, where we were conducting training operations with the local police and trying to help them stabilize the region, which was a phenomenal experience. And then my second deployment in 2010 was a non-combat deployment where we embarked aboard naval vessels, traveling across the Middle East and conducting different non-combat operations, including things like supporting disaster relief in Haiti after the earthquake in 2010. With that experience, I became incredibly empowered and just had such a fulfilled experience in leading those teams that I decided to continue to try to progress within the Marine Corps and to continue to pursue this line of work. And so I chose to become a Marine Raider, or a Marine Special Operations Officer, and went through training in 2011 to get selected and to complete, to earn this title. Shortly thereafter, I found myself in charge of a small team of Marines and sailors, where we were tasked with a very complex mission called Village Stability Operations. And this mission required us as a small team to embed and live in a local village in Afghanistan to help revive the economic landscape, establish security, and link political governance to the highest levels there in Afghanistan, with the hopes that we could create a sustainable infrastructure so that these people who were at risk of enemy or Taliban influence would be able to resist that once we had left and departed. Unfortunately for us, as we had arrived, we began to work with our local police, but we were in a very kinetic region that we were, faced with heavy combat on a regular basis, trying to survive as a small team, out in the middle of nowhere in this a rural area in Afghanistan. And so the construction at this time in the area we're in was mud. It was mud huts. As you can see from this image, this is a typical Afghan compound in the region that we lived in the Helmand River Valley, where there was no running water, no electricity, but they just had these mud brick buildings, which were surrounded by these massive mud walls. And this was the area that we were tasked with working in. And so in order to try to repel enemy influence, we first had to establish security in their area. And so we began to conduct these ambush patrols where we would sneak out at night, occupy these buildings in the cover of darkness, and stay there and observe enemy activity in the region to ensure that they weren't able to surprise us in those engagements. And when we do this, we began to have success, but these missions required us to take a lot of calculated risks. Within the walls of these compounds, we were somewhat protected by the very thick mud and brick buildings. We were protected from enemy fire, but with that protection, you're unable to observe what's happening around you and what's happening in your situation. You're not aware of what's happening. And so the only way to do that would be to expose yourself in some fashion to be able to observe what's happening. And so a lot of the times what we would do is we'd take these ladders, we would crawl on the roof and be able to look and observe out into the valley or wherever we were looking to see what was going on. And so we knew this was a risk, but this was, the only way that we could understand the environment that we were in. So this was me at one of these missions, and we began to have success on these missions and began to create a security bubble and drive back the enemy and start to really build the relationships and set the conditions for success with the partners that we were working with. This was the last mission that I was preparing for before I'd gotten injured. And so this is myself standing, doing our final pre-mission checks with my assistant patrol leader, a man named Brian Jacklin, who was a special operator that had worked for me in this team. And shortly, after we conducted these inspections, we set off to occupy this building. And this building was maybe 1.5 miles away from our compound where we were staged, and it was further than we had gone in a region that was more foreign to us. But we got out there before sunrise, and things went well for occupying this building. But immediately after the sun came up, we found ourselves in an enemy firefight. After the initial lull in fighting, I was down in the compound. Brian was on the rooftop observing. After there was a lull in fighting, I switched with him. And so he was on the roof, he came down, and then I went up so that I could gain situational awareness and be able to report that back to our higher command and ensure that we were managing the situation accordingly. I was up there with 2 other Marines, and maybe 10 or 15 minutes after this had happened, we were engaged by an enemy fighter to our flank. And in the opening moments of that engagement, the Marine to my left, Sergeant Rick Breer, was shot through the neck, which was an AK-47 round that had gone inside in one side of his neck and out the other. And then I was shot at that same moment in the left shoulder, where the bullet went into my spine and lodged between my T6 and T7 vertebrae, instantly paralyzing me from the chest down. So when that happened, I immediately slumped over, tried to take stock of myself, started to follow our procedures that we had trained to do, which was for me to relay this information over radio to my team, and then to try to triage myself and provide first aid and help stabilize myself or my teammates. When I tried to pick myself up, immediately realized nothing was working below my chest level. And so waited for my team to spring into action and took cover to make sure that I didn't get injured any worse than I already was. My team had sprung into action pretty quickly and began to repel the enemy while taking actions to get us off the roof, triage us, and stabilize us, which was a complex environment. We only had 10 Americans on this patrol and 10 Afghan partners on this patrol as well. And so we're receiving a heavy enemy fire from multiple different directions, taking men out of the fight in order to triage myself and Rick and keep us alive, calling in helicopters for air support and medical evacuation, all the while still trying to keep the enemy from overrunning our position. And our team performed flawlessly. They brought Rick back to life. So despite being shot in the neck and with one side and out the other, he was kind of mumbling and awake and has made a full recovery since then, which is no small miracle. And while that was occurring, I actually started to get worse. I had blood pooling in my lung cavity while I was being treated. I was awake through most of it, but over the time that it took for the helicopters to come in and to evacuate us, I started to lose consciousness in those things. One of the last memories that I had before I got on the helicopter and received care from the medics on the helicopter was them carrying us to this helicopter, which you see on this screen. And what you'll see on the screen is that I was not a light person. I was wearing gear, so it was about 300 pounds. Rick was similar. Each one of these men had to leave the protection of the compound that we were in willingly to carry us out into this open field where we're being engaged by enemy fire in order to get us on the helicopter and save our lives. Without hesitation, to a man, they did that and were willing to sacrifice their lives potentially to try to save ours. And that's why I'm here today, and that's why I'm alive. And so for me, knowing this situation, having witnessed it, was the best and worst day of my life. It was the worst day of my life because I was no longer able to continue being a Marine officer, the job that I had loved and what I'd been put on earth to do at that time. I was left with lasting physical injuries, which I still deal with today. But it was also the best day of my life because as a leader in charge of this small team, I witnessed heroism, bravery, and sacrifice above and beyond what I think anyone in the special operations community may have witnessed. And so as a leader, that was the best possible outcome and memory that I have. And I'm very fortunate to say that I was a part of a team that was able to do that. And that's the reason why I'm alive today. And so this began a long path to recovery. So I was injured in June of 2012, came back, met my wife in the hospital, had a couple of surgeries, and then began rehab. And it was up and down. But during that time, as I was emotionally coming to grips with the injury that I sustained and thinking about how to move forward with my life and all of the emotional roller coaster that I was on, I was reminded of two key frameworks, which now, even looking back on and as I consider, are incredibly meaningful and helpful for me. And so the first one is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so Maslow was a famous psychologist who had developed this theory, which is that certain levels of needs need to be met before you can seek or behave in a way that will allow you to achieve higher levels of behavior and motivation. And so what you see on the bottom are physiological needs, safety, and then, more esoteric or more meaningful motivations for behaviors at the top, obviously with self-actualization and esteem. And so the basic theory says, when you behave as a human, there's a reason why you're conducting these types of behaviors. If you attribute it and understand why you're doing these sorts of things and why you feel this way, it'll make you more aware of yourself and more aware of your environment and others, and allow you to be more effective in anything you do. And so for me, as a Marine Raider, as a Marine Special Operations Officer, I was doing exactly what I wanted to be doing with the people I wanted to be doing it with, for a mission that I truly believed in and a purpose that I thought was just. And so I believe at that time I was self-actualized and operating at that highest level of motivation and behavior. But in an instant, I was then thrust into a basic physiological survival mode. So I was no longer operating at that high level. I was merely surviving. And then it took time for me to rebuild and to move forward through this process to get to where I am today, which I think is still at the higher levels now, for the most part. But as I went on this journey, understood and asked myself, for example, in business school, when I chose to enter this, pursue this mission in this path of becoming a medical device entrepreneur, of why do you do what you want to do? Why are you choosing to pursue these things? And much like you heard from Paul, the mission that he's on now as well with Yon Medical, which is truly inspirational, as well as if you're doing things for money or resources, you have this certain level of motivation that's different than if you are doing it for, say, esteem or belonging, or just doing it because of a desire to help others, right, and to create this environment. And so hopefully, and I believe that, for most of you that are on this call and most of you involved in this industry, one of the most amazing things is that we're doing this work not because we're getting rich quick, because that doesn't happen, obviously, in medical device industry, but we're doing it because there's a massive impact and a higher purpose, a higher calling to help others. And so as I went back to business school at UCLA, and was considering my options of what my next career and my next mission would be, instead of going to be a financial analyst or an investment banker or those sorts of things where the motivation would have been resources, I thought and I asked myself, there's something unique that only I can do, that I'm only equipped to do? And what I found and believed that to be was to use my personal experience and to turn that into businesses where products can be put on the market to help people improve their quality of life. And so that's my newest mission and what I've devoted, my life to, my life's mission after I sustained this injury. The other primary psychological principle that was incredibly helpful and meaningful and impactful for me as I went through this recovery process was Stoicism. And so this was something that every midshipman at the Naval Academy learns, because some of our previous graduates that had experienced very challenging times and spent time in captivity in Vietnam and the Hanoi Hilton, people like John McCain and Admiral James Stockdale and these others credited this philosophy with maintaining their sanity throughout years in captivity and returning and thriving. And ultimately what Stoicism, as many of you know, focuses on is the key tenet of focusing on what you can control and not on what you cannot control. For me, the step further that I try to share with everybody and that has been helpful for me is you probably underestimate what you're capable of. You may not realize how powerful as an individual you actually are and what may be within your control. And so that was the situation that I found as I was recovering. And, I was in this situation where I went from being, on top of the world as a barrel-chested, freedom fighter and, Marine Raider to a frail, weak person fighting for my life that couldn't get out of bed. And so this shook my mental psyche to a point where I was then, being told that I was fragile by all of these people, and feeling fragile, and not understanding the true power that I had and what was within my control. And so this took time to work through, but the first experience that I had, moving forward was I wasn't able to walk because I was paralyzed. But as I became an expert in spinal cord injury recovery, as a person, as a patient, as a user, I realized there was innovative technology out there in this device, which is a ReWalk robotics exoskeleton, that enabled me to walk again, despite being completely paralyzed. And so using this device, I was able to help out advocate for them, not as an employee of the company, but just as an ambassador. I saw firsthand when they were there going public on the NASDAQ. I saw firsthand, working through reimbursement, and I lobbied to help them achieve reimbursement with the VA. And then I also set a goal, right? I witnessed firsthand the type of impact that medical technology can have on people. And this is a picture from my retirement ceremony when I left the military and medically retired in 2014. And I set a goal to leave the military on my own 2 feet, the same way that I'd come in. And so I didn't know if I'd be able to attain that because of the challenges with learning how to use the device and everything, but I did, fortunately. And so I was able to stand, walk, salute the flag one last time as an active duty Marine officer before leaving because of this innovative medical technology. This experience called into question, what I was capable of and what I wasn't, and I realized that I was probably capable of more than I thought I was. I had met the founders and the people who were behind this invention, and they weren't that much different than me. They were just other people. And actually, this device was invented by a quadriplegic, another man from Israel, who just had this idea and took action to make it happen. And this event inspired me to go and pursue this line of work and to try to solve other problems. And so that was the genesis for Spinal Singularity. And the first thing that we focused on was bladder management for adult males with urinary retention. And so this was the biggest challenge that I'd faced on a day-to-day basis. And this was the biggest market opportunity that we identified when I was working to develop these plans in business school at UCLA. And so we started the company in 2015 and have been working to develop this product over the past 5 years since, and have learned so much and had so many failures along the way. But we've figured it out. We have a device that works. We're in the middle of a pivotal clinical study and optimistic that we'll be cleared by the FDA by the end of this year and on the market. And when we do, this device will revolutionize the nature of urinary management for people with urinary retention forever. And, that was something I never would have guessed was possible until I had this experience and began to take action and take a calculated risk to determine what I was able to accomplish or not accomplish. And only through those calculated risks was I able to understand what the environment truly was and what my own, what was actually within my control and not. And so what was seemingly an impossible, audacious task to say, I want to revolutionize bladder management for adult males across the world with urinary retention, we were able to turn into a reality because of, the method, right? The calculated risk taking, resourcing and building and leading teams and taking action above all else. A funny story about fear and taking calculated risks as well. Shortly after I launched this startup, my wife and I were blessed to have twins. So we had twin boys. And at that time, it was a pretty dynamic and uncertain time in the company's future. And so that was stressful. And we had financial stress. And then there was lack of sleep and other things with the twins at home. And I developed shingles. And so that's something very common for anybody over 65. But as a 33-year-old man, it was stress induced. And my wife still gives me a hard time about that today, where she says, you were in combat, you had to fight for your life after being shot. That didn't stress you out. Starting a company, having financial risk, having to make payroll or, deal with twins or these sorts of things, that stressed you out in the same way, the same psychological, chemical, way that stressed you out as much or more, that it gave you shingles, right? And had this effect on you. So she still gives me a hard time about that. Moving forward, now that I've had one repetition of the highs and lows of creating a device and product and building a company, I'm working to try to expand my impact and grow my impact to accomplish what I set out to do, which was to improve people's lives through innovation. And so most recently, I've been fortunate to license some technology from the Department of the VA, which they had developed and patented, and to create a consumer product for skin inspection, which is the next product that I've been working on. And this is a much simpler, much lower cost, lower risk device. It's very straightforward, but it just enables people to take images in a more efficient and ergonomic way of anything that they need to inspect for their skin. So diabetic foot ulcers, pressure sores, wounds, moles, any potential risks of skin cancer, or any other reason, any other dermatological application for skin inspection. And so this has been an incredibly rewarding project, and I've been fortunate to do a launch of this publicly just earlier this month, and we're hoping to ship product by Q3 of this year. And so in summary, to highlight the three things I hope you take from this discussion, and the key themes from this are, don't overanalyze, make a plan and take action at the end of the day. Take calculated risks, but I would venture to say that most people overanalyze things and are on that side of the spectrum as opposed to underanalyzing. And so definitely make sure that you're not overanalyzing, make a plan and take action. What we learned from Maslow, right, is understand your motivations and choose your pursuits wisely. A lot of people that I talk to today get into entrepreneurship because they think they're going to get rich quick, right? And all those superficial motivations fade away very fast. And what you're left with is a choice to continue in this pursuit or quit and fail, right? And almost always what I see in my experience is those superficial motivations are not enough to continue to push you through those challenging times and hard times. And so when I talk to entrepreneurs now, what I suggest is pick something that you are incredibly passionate about and that you're willing to do for 10 years, right? Because the secret that I know, the truth that I know and I experience is arguably that there is no get rich quick scheme. And then lastly, with Stoicism, taking Stoicism a step further, to conduct calculated experiments to better understand yourself and your environment, to continue to push the limits and test the boundaries and understand exactly where those boundaries are in a calculated way, to enable you to understand what's in your control and the power that you have over your own situation. And so this concludes my time. Like Scott said, happy to answer any questions you guys may have. And if you don't prefer to ask those in this environment, you have my personal email there. Feel free to email me at any time if I can be of assistance in any of the endeavors you choose to pursue. And thank you again to Scott and David Dobson and Mike and Christine and all the team at Starfish for giving us this opportunity and this platform to share this time with you. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm on. Well, thanks so much, Derek. That is totally inspiring and really remarkable story from many dimensions. So to our audience, now we're going to swing over to the Q&A section, and I noticed we already have quite a lot of questions in there, and I will navigate around that to find a balance between our speakers, and we'll go for the next 25 minutes or so, and excited to hear what themes come out. So let me first swing over to Paul, and the first question we had, what are the key indicators for the wrong money? I'm sure you have some thoughts about that.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So, when you look at money you're getting in, one of the things you want to look at is, are they letting you run the company? Are you the one that's going to make the decision and they've given you the money? You're the one that's taking the risk. You're the one that's put this thing together and has the vision. And oftentimes, whether it be venture or other corporations or angels, they think they know more than you do about what you've just been working 2 years on and have embedded your life in. And if that's the way they're coming at you, I would suggest finding somebody else. So when I say the wrong money, I mean, basically, if they don't trust you to take their money and go do the right thing with it, then you don't have the right partnership.
There we go. So if they don't give you the money, they're the wrong people. That's an interesting rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to jump down the list a little bit, and we'll jump back over to Derek. We have a request. Can you talk us through how you raise capital for your two ventures? And Derek, you'll have to unmute.
Yeah. So when we first started with Spinal Singularity, we did everything. We tried everything. We did the shotgun approach. So we did government grants, We did business plan competitions. We did self-funding. We did an Indiegogo campaign for donations, pass the hat, essentially, which is kind of like a informal, like friends and family round, but they didn't get equity. And then, we did some accelerators. So actually, we were very fortunate to be accepted into the Y Combinator program, which was our first equity investment. And arguably, no one else would have invested in us if they didn't invest first. And so a lot of the accelerator programs offer tremendous resources, and it helps, right, to have somebody else de-risk your venture, especially as a first-time founder, first-time entrepreneur, and understanding those things. So those were some of the early things that we did just to get it off the ground and to get to where we needed to go. And then beyond that, we found angel investors, family offices, and venture capital funds that can support. The other part of the reason why it was incredibly challenging too was because we, like most good business school students, you go there and you think if you come out with some slides and a business plan, people are just going to throw money at you. Not the case, especially not in this industry. So knowing what I know now, right, the difference for Habit Camera, we had a prototype, there was issued IP, we licensed it, so there was already a foundational underpinning for a successful venture. And the only things that I'm bringing to that is the commercial entity to bring it to market. And we'll be focusing on sales and marketing and distribution. And so that's how we've funded Habit Camera. But for Habit Camera, actually, it's been self-funded to date. So we don't have any investors. And so it's been another interesting project. But having learned from some of the lessons that, Paul has mentioned and everybody else has mentioned is if you don't need investors or you're not seeking that type of funding, or if you can get away without it, then maybe in your best interest to take that time and to do it without giving away part of the company, giving away control. Because the second you do, you have a competing set of priorities, right? And then different interests in some cases where it may not always.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Derek. So I'm going to jump the next
company.
Thanks so much, Derek. So the next question back to Paul. So you have a former Zoft electronic brachytherapy director online here. And he's interested in how your team created and developed the early story for electronic brachytherapy, since it was way ahead of its time.
So interested to know who that was. But anyway, so Zoft, the whole idea behind Zoft initially was that we were helping this company, IRC Corporation, who had done one of the evil deeds in that first set of little one-liners, and that was they had a startup that depended on the startup. So they built a catheter to go into the coronary arteries, pull out the blood, and replace it with a drug for coronary stenosis to keep the vessels from reclosing after stenting, or after ballooning. But what happened was the drug companies didn't work. Those drugs didn't work. So here was a perfectly good catheter that had been developed with nowhere to go. So they decided to try and use radiation as an antiproliferative for the restenosis, but they couldn't develop they didn't know how to build that tube. And so when we started, we already knew a market. When they went belly up, and a couple of the engineers from there, Mike and Tom, said, look, there's a market for this already built. You just have to build the tube. And so the real impetus for Zoft was that we could build a tube into a market where the problem already existed, and somebody had already thought up the idea of this micro miniature X-ray tube. And I just came along because I had the expertise in how to put a ceramic to metal device together in a 2 millimeter, and wasn't scared of things that were 2 millimeters in diameter, which look really big under a microscope. They don't look so big with sitting on your hand. But that's how Zoft got started. That's a little unique in my companies in that I didn't invent the technology there. I just had the expertise.
Mm-hmm. I can't help but notice that your expertise was created through some early failures, but something sustained you. And I think that's a very interesting emotional resilience question, that after nothing but failures, you still believed the next thing was going to be the thing. So can you walk us through that early moments?
Well, it's interesting. I only picked a few to talk about, and a couple of the that failed. Yeah, sure. You always learn. I know way more now about starting a company than I knew on that first one, which was I look back on that and think, wow, that was a mess. But of the 8 companies I talked about there, 5 are still in existence. The original Inta got sold off. And Jan Medical is still in existence, Zoft is still in existence, Wood Toga and Mind Rhythm. So those are all still functioning companies. Yeah, the big one, Condescent, went under, and the laser paint stripping company, Silicon Alps, didn't make it. But so what's the resilience? I guess I'm a pretty happy guy that has great ideas. They seem to come. I didn't talk about the color coding on there, but 3 of those companies are what I call epiphany solutions. I was working on something else. I looked down at these things, and the whole thing was just, wow, I could do this, this, and this, and there was the deal. The others, like Zoft, came from other directions, and they worked up their way slowly, and they were driven in slowly. So some of the inspirations are just, wow, I don't know how that happens. The pieces come together, and others are very much slogs through cool ideas. But I tend to really go after things that leapfrog the world, the technology. I don't really look to innovate little stuff. And I think, I look over at Derek, and I think that's good. Go for things that everyone else says can't work or won't work. And if they tell you you can't do it, you're on to something right. You're headed in the right direction. Always look for the critics, because they've always got it wrong.
Yeah, the only thing I would dare to add to that too is, as a young entrepreneur, what I'm learning, obviously from experienced folks like yourselves too, is it's a high risk of failure, but you can't underestimate shots on goal, right? So you're going to miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So.
Oh boy, is that for sure?
So many entrepreneurs, right, fail and pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and push forward, right? Continue moving forward, and you can't dwell on the failure.
Right. Great. So I'll ask Derek a question next. You talked a lot about the mission-driven and helping other people and so on. And I'm curious about your process of how you balance that against sort of the rational market analysis, sort of business school thinking, and what your experience has been.
Great question. The way that I've approached those types of problems and assessing those opportunities is something else that I learned very early on as well, which was, if the business plan doesn't support and the market opportunity doesn't support sustainable infrastructure and creating profit, then you have to reassess the situation, right? Otherwise, it's just charity. And for all of these types of things, what I learned, initially when I went back to school, I thought, because I didn't have experience in the industry at all. When I went back to graduate school, I thought, hey, universities, academia is where all these innovations come from, right? This is where things happen. But what I quickly learned was billions and billions of dollars get spent in university research that will never see the light of day. And so that skill is not, some amazing things come out of there, but the real value and impact only happens if you can commercialize and translate that innovation into a meaningful and sustainable business. And so that's why I went to business school. And when I was there, that's why I chose to pursue this line of work, is because the innovation is not necessarily a commodity, but there's plenty of innovations. The most challenging time is mapping the product market fit and creating a sustainable business, because otherwise it's for nothing, right? In my mind, and the way I structure my mission is, if I make this innovation, but no one can use it a year from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, what was it for, right? If I'm not helping people and creating that, then it's not, then something's wrong, and you have to go back and rework the equation. So everything that I approach is not necessarily from a technical standpoint. The technical diligence has to be there. But even as an investor, and Paul's probably heard this as well, a lot of investors will just not even dive into the technical risk until they assess the market and other types of risks associated with any sort of venture, because it's it's kind of a paradox, but it's also the beauty of the industry that we're in is that, and this was the epiphany that I had at school was the more profitable this company becomes, the more people we're helping, right? The only way that we make money as an industry is if people are using our product and there's a significant impact on their quality of life. And the better that is, the more money we'll make, right? So it's complete alignment of incentives, as opposed to say like, I like beating up on bankers and financial services folks and everybody else and people who invent synthetic CDOs and all that other stuff. Like they're making money, but they're creating money and it's not necessarily aligned with a purpose incentive. Everything that I've seen in the medical device industry for sustainable companies that are successful have a pure alignment of profit and purpose. And so going back to the original question, how to assess it, everything that I assess is looking at it as a business perspective, because without the business plan, no technology, can survive, right? If there's not a solid business.
Great. On a sort of related note, I mean, you're the poster child for your condition, but how did you avoid getting drawn into thinking of yourself as a proxy for the market and going to find out the data from others?
Yeah, great question. Through research, right, and diligence. So you can be blinded by your own, people are often blind. That's a very common mistake for entrepreneurs to fall into, right? Is I want it, so that means everybody else does too, right? And so one of the first things that we did was part of what we call the customer discovery process, which many of you are probably familiar with, where you need to go interview people and hear what they say, right? And one thing that I've been encouraged to learn is people are very honest, right? They'll tell you if they don't like something or if it sucks, or like they'll give you that negative feedback. And one of the best places to do that is on social media, right? So like a lot of the stuff that I put out as one of the best market research tests, I did this for Habit Camera as well. We have these affinity groups, right? So there's people with spinal cord injury, people with wheelchair, there's like private groups and these message forums, and they're pretty hostile, like pretty angry people a lot of the time, and they'll give you negative feedback a lot. And so when I put the idea for Habit Camera in there before I decided to license the technology from the VA, I was expecting, a lot of stuff, and there were some negative comments, are like, oh, that's stupid, or oh, it's too expensive. But there was overwhelmingly, what I thought overwhelmingly, like 80% plus were positive feedback, when normally it's like 99% negative, right? And so conducting that customer discovery and understanding that's important, and not taking for granted that just because you like it, everybody else will is critical. And so that was the primary way I did it. And same thing with clinicians, talking to clinicians and understand things, when, for example, with spinal singularity, I talked to probably over 100 urologists now, and hearing what they like and don't like and what they think. And they're very candid to tell us, this will work, or I don't like this, just the more people you can talk to, the better. Because I think a lot of people focus on the technical risk and the clinical risk and those sorts of things. But some of my mentors had advised me, focus on the market risk, right? Like if you address the market risk and it's there, someone will buy into this and hire people smart enough to get the technical and clinical things figured out.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much. Okay. Question for Paul then. I love this story, the notion of the epiphany-based company. I couldn't help but notice a lot of pictures of you in those startups. You had gray hair already, so I think the epiphany you developed that epiphany ability based on the sort of all this tough experience. So, can you talk about that question from Christy? How did you handle moving into fields that you do not have experience in? How do you keep from falling into a hole?
Yeah, so that's really that chart was kind of a little bit of how I got to some of those, but I said I didn't have an interview with Lynn Reed at the beginning. Well, I never have had an interview, so I've never interviewed for a job, so I'm probably not employable. I've had, oh yeah, how many years did you work in that field or this field or the other field? Well, not very many, so you don't stick around, do you? But mostly, I'm a physicist. I'm good at mechanical things, so I know how to build stuff. And I've always had this kind of belief that I can go do whatever it is I want to go do. And so if it happens to be little X-ray tubes, well, then I'll go learn about that and get a book and read about that. And if it has to do with RFID, I'll do that. So I've been sort of a lifelong learner, and I just really enjoy new fields. I think you have a different perspective when you move into a field you don't know about. You don't know what it is you're not supposed to be able to do, which is helpful if you know, the little roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote can run across imaginary planes for a very long time before somebody points out that they're not actually allowed to do that. And I think a lot of this is you can invent things that shouldn't be because you see it from a different perspective that you didn't, you weren't trapped by the conventional wisdom.
Great answer. Okay, swinging back to Derek and switching topics, I wonder if you could talk about how you decided to build a board and advisory group, and sort of balancing sort of the aspirational big names versus usefulness versus accessibility and so on.
Yeah, one of the most important things you can do is, structuring in a meaningful way the people that are giving you advice and helping guide you along the journey, especially as a young entrepreneur or first-time CEO, first-time founder. For me, in the early stages, we didn't have the network, right? So we took the best people we could find, but also the people that were willing to really get hands-on and help guide us, because we needed the experience. And so when you look at every individual, whether it's in this industry or even in other industries like the nonprofit industry, the things that they can contribute, right, are time, talent, and treasure, right? So, or some combination thereof. And so everybody has certain value. You'll need some people who are investors who can just give you money, and that's fine. And you may need to give them a board seat or give them advice or give them an advisory role. But you also need people that can donate or provide time and talent. And so depending upon the stage of where you're at, you should set the ideal list of the 10 or 20 people that you think could advise you at that stage and would be valuable to you. And then figure out a way to get to know them and ask them for advice and see if they're interested in supporting you in some fashion. You obviously don't want to be in a rush to give any sort of control or advisor position to people you don't know or don't already have relationships with or haven't gotten to know or vetted, or that don't believe in the mission or don't understand where you're going or where you're trying to take this product to develop the vision that you've set forth. So one of the beauties of social media and being so connected now is people are accessible. And surprisingly enough, if you talk to or cold message 10 people, a handful of them will reply and respond and may be interested in helping you. If like Paul said, you can tell a compelling story and convince them about how what you're doing is going to meaningfully impact so many people and draw a very clear line of what you need and what they can offer. And so some of the advisors, we've had amazing advisors, both with Spinal Singularity at all stages of our company life cycle. And the best relationships we've had have been when we've had people that believe in the vision, understand where we're going, understand our own weaknesses and our own shortfalls, and how their strengths and their experience can help us either learn or they can guide us to address those types of shortfalls. And so, for example, in the earlier stages, when we were still sketching on graph paper with pencil, right? We had very technically and clinically focused advisors was the heavy focus. Now that we've matured the design and are focusing now and looking up and looking forward to commercialization, now our board has more sales, marketing, product launch, commercial experience, because that's going to be the next phase of operations for Spinal Singularity. And so for us, it was just a matter of looking online, trying to build the network, talking to people, meeting with urologists, cold messaging, searching, and just really doing a lot of networking. And then getting to know people, doing the dating, and then getting into relationships and getting married even, at stages too. So, so there's no real science to it, I would say, but it's just get to know people and, and trust your gut.
Fantastic. So I wonder, Paul, you've done this about 30 times. So I'm curious, if you have some high-level complementary wisdom to offer here.
Yeah, so I agree with Derek. The advisors that you get are the ones you need at a particular point in time. Sometimes they're the ones you get because they come along with the money. So, that's good too. But it is amazing how much people will contribute to you. If they're also compelled by the story, they're not just investors. They're also other people, potentially staff. Eventually, like one for Jan Medical, only one of those people in that picture ended up working for the company. The rest got stock. When you start a company, you have really equity and ideas. Later, you have money, and then you get disciples that come along with you. But it is certainly, you have to throw the net wide. You have to be able to fire volunteers, which I've had to do. That didn't get along with the team. That's hard when you haven't hired them, but you have to tell them it's not working out. But you do get, as you throw the net out, one of my one-liners is nobody ever came to my house when I was in bed and gave me money. The opposite of that is you got to get out there. And as Derek said earlier, you guaranteed to lose 100% of the time if you don't get out there with something. So I think getting the advisors out, getting that team in, getting other eyes on it. Don't drink your own Kool-Aid. Get other people to tell you just how awful your idea is early on, and then change it. Don't be married to it. Change where you're doing based on the direction you're getting from the rest of the world.
Great.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add to that as well is that's one of the most foundational experiences when you're founding a company is when you go out and try to sell this idea and this vision to people. You will refine how you're messaging and how you're communicating to people based on the number of interactions that you have. And so when you go out, the more you do it, the better you get, and the more you learn and the more you refine and get it down. And after a month or 6 months or a year of pitching people and convincing them to join your cause, you should be able to, be very good and very efficient at selling that story. And so a lot of people talk about founder-led sales. And in medical device, right, you can't sell it until you have the product on the market and everything else, but you are selling this vision and this idea. And as a founder, if you can't sell it, you need to find someone who can, or you have no chance of success, right? Because you can't rally the support and the base that you need to get the resources to move it forward. So I can't stress enough that you just have to go face to face or virtually and just sell the vision to people. And you'll hear it enough after you do it enough times that you'll refine things or modify messaging to really be effective. And until you have an effective pitch where you can tell people, we're doing this because we care about this, and there's this huge the market opportunity, then you're not going to stand a chance with any investors either if you can't get that pitch down with advisors or employees or co-founders and that sort of thing. So can't stress enough the founder-led sales concept.
Great.
Yeah, and I'll second that. I have several, venture firms. I've gone to a lot of them now, but ones that I know won't invest in a particular deal, but will hear my pitch. They'll do a deal flow with me because I call them throwaways, because I can go pitch them. I'm not expecting them, but they're smart and they're good folks, and I'll go pitch it and they'll tell me what they think about it, and that will help inform it. But on the other side, I also want to worry. I don't know how many times I laugh with my teams about how many slides we're going to get through, really, because you start asking the questions and you get to the first presentation and they say, oh yeah, but what about the market? So you change the slides around, put the market up front, and the next guy comes along and says, gee, I don't understand the technology. And you got to not track the needle, from an aviation thing. Don't track the needle. Just pick the approach. They're never going to let you get through the whole deck anyway, for the most part.
Great. So another question for you, Paul. So in terms of designing your exit, when do you open the can on talking to a strategic potential acquirer? Is that a thing at the beginning to sort of validate that the whole concept holds water, or can you talk about your philosophy?
Yeah, so there's two sides to that. I think both. Certainly at Mind Rhythm, we've been talking to potential acquirers from the get-go, not because we really are aiming the company to do that, but because they are also smart about the market and they can tell you which things they think are right or where the mines are buried. The other side of that is that do not build a company to sell it. Anyone that starts a company to sell it is probably in trouble. I mean, Derek said it because of the wanting the emotional impact and wanting to do it to change the world. But it's also, you don't do it right if you do it to sell it. You're thinking differently. You need to think about building this company up now. If along the way you get a really good offer from somebody that's going to not bury it, but take it forward, and they've got better marketing and better manufacturing than you do, that would be wonderful. But don't start it to sell it. That's not the right mindset.
Derek?
Yeah, we personally, I have a lot less experience than Paul engaging with strategics, but we've, from the advice that we've had and what we've tried to pursue at Spinal Singularity is to continue to build relationships with them, right? So when I first started, I talked with a few of them, 5 years ago, right, when it was still just a napkin sketch, because it helped us learn, right? It helped me learn about how they think about things, how they commercialize, how they see the market opportunities, provide some validation, right, to the market, which is helpful. And then we've just continued to keep them abreast and talk to them at stages of the way. We may seek to, potentially allow one of them to invest in future rounds, which has its own benefits and shortfalls. But, as Paul mentioned, we're continuing and we have this plan, which will enable our company to be successful with or without them, right? Because we have to build value and we have to build a sustainable company. And then if a partnership happens along the way, then great. But the only thing I would add to kind of the initial stuff that we already discussed is if you do have the desire potentially at some point to get acquired, putting yourself in their shoes and understanding how they operate, like all these big companies, right? You're not just going to go to them and then get acquired a month later, right? Like there's a human dynamic to it. There's a time dynamic to it. A little bit of it's timing, a little bit of it's luck maybe. So it's never bad to start now and to build relationships with these companies and these people who may become internal champions of your product within their companies at some point. So kind of the plan we're on now is, we have the list of 5 to 10 companies that could be partners for our product. And we keep them abreast of progress and meaningful milestones every 6 to 9 months or so. Not because we're expecting them to get involved, but just because, we're just continuing to show up progress and build relationships. And if they do choose to try to pursue a partnership, it's not starting from zero, right? It's, hey, we've known Derek for 5 years, he had a really rough start, but actually this thing they talked about for 5 years, like it's working now, and they're taking market share from us, and those sorts of things. So that's what I would add.
Fantastic. So we're coming up close to time here. I'll just ask one more question for each of you. Really, what I'm interested beyond all the tactics of entrepreneurship, when the chips are down, you have to make a really tough decision. You've just had a key partner quit, or your whole premise isn't working, and you have to retreat into yourself. Can you talk about any behaviors or habits or inspirations? How do you carry on for another day? I'll start with Paul.
So I would say basically you dig down inside. I'm old enough now that I don't get too concerned about the monetary stuff. Yeah, you run out of money. I've closed a couple of companies down. That's not fun. The lows are low. But in terms of keeping your spirits up and stuff, you just got to have a self-confidence that you really did the best job you could do, and there was nothing else you could have done. There's the gray rhinos and the black swans. The gray rhinos you see coming, and the black swans, come from nowhere. and sometimes they do. And if that's what your whole life is, you've wrapped it up in this one thing, and you're now, Maslow's pyramid. You're now just got your knees taken out from under you. To Derek's case, that's a terrible thing that happened to you, and yet you've come back. And I think when you're down, when things are down, you just gotta say, hey, this is what I was dealt. Let's go do it again. I don't know, how else to describe it, is say there's no magic to it. It's just somewhere deep inside, I think.
Fantastic. Thank you, Derek. Can you answer that?
I have a few things that I think about that, and it's normal to feel sorry for yourself. Everybody does at some point, right? You're like, oh man, we were about to launch our pivotal clinical study and COVID hit, that sucks. Like, I feel sorry for myself, right? But some of those things are outside of your control, right? And so being able to adapt or rapidly understand and compartmentalize that and not have a victim mindset, right? Of saying, this happened, it's out of my control. What do we do about it, right? How do we make a plan and take action? And taking action, the sooner you can do that, gives you better chances for success and how to survive, right? And so when that happened to us, right, and COVID happened and delayed our pivotal clinical study, like, what do you do, right? Like, other things that we can do, right? We filed for additional federal grants. We got more patents. We filed for loans. We filed, we cut our expenses. We cut our burn. You do everything you can, right? You have to take action. And so the victim mindset is, it's real, right? And it's normal to feel sorry for yourself, but the sooner you take stock of things, compartmentalize things, and continue to move forward, the better off you'll be. That's one of the things I've been incredibly fortunate to learn through personal experiences. Based on my life experience, right? I have a lot of friends who unfortunately were killed in Afghanistan and didn't make it back. And so now putting things into perspective for me, this is a business, right? This is, yeah, it gave me shingles. It's real. I have real fear and real stress associated with this, but it's not going to kill me. Like, I'm not dying. Like, my ego is tied into success and all of these things and everything else. But like, if we fail, like Paul said, it's not because I didn't try. It's not because I didn't work hard enough. I did everything I could to be successful. And I'm still alive, right? I'm not going to be homeless. We'll survive. We still live in, some of the best modern societies in the world, right? It's not like there's like not an actual real physiological threat associated with the failure of a startup, and we're very fortunate to have that reality. But if you don't understand that world perspective and, you think, I started a company and it failed, I'm going to die, right? Like, it's going to be hard for you to get over that. But if you're able to calm down, put things in perspective and exercise a little bit of gratitude as well, right? Like, gratitude for all the things that you have and the environment and the safety that you have by being a member of society, you'll be able to move forward. And that should empower you, hopefully, to be willing to take these risks in the future, right? Like, understanding I'm not going to die, right? Like, it's financial, it's paper, it's money, right? It's things. It's not my life, That makes it really easy.
Derek, I'll add to that the chairman of Sony years ago said he didn't judge people by their successes, he judged them by their failures.
Very interesting. Very nice. Well, I think that's a wonderful way to round things off. I would like to express deep gratitude to Paul Lavoy and Derek Herrera for being willing to come on stage live with us and share their wisdom with all the people on and people to come who will watch this online. Once again, if you do want to watch this, remind yourself of what happened. If you go to starfishmedical.com, about us webinars, this will be posted in a week or two. And you can also come back next month if you want to sign up for our newsletter so that you'll be informed about future ones. The next one's about successful university spinouts, which should be really interesting as well. So once again, thanks so much. It's been a total pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you, guys.